Before the Great Kingdom there was the land. Southern Africa was a vast tapestry of rolling hills, lush river valleys and sweeping grasslands. Here, scattered across the terrain between the Drakensberg Mountains and the warm Indian Ocean, lived numerous Nguni-speaking clans. They were cattle people. Their lives moved to the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of their herds. Wealth was not measured in gold or diamonds, but in the number of cattle a man possessed. These clans, like the Mthethwa, the Ndwandwe, and a small, insignificant group known as the Zulu, lived in a world of shifting alliances and local rivalries, their conflicts often small-scale and ritualistic. This was a land of immense potential, waiting for a force powerful enough to unite it. These were the people of the sky, the Amazulu. Their world was structured around the homestead, or kraal, a circular arrangement of beehive-shaped huts encircling a central cattle enclosure. The chief was the heart of the clan. It was a crucible, a time of fire and pressure that would forge new leaders and new ideas. From this cauldron of change, a single man would emerge. Shaka was born around 1787, the illegitimate son of Senzanga Kona and a woman named Nandi from the Langeni people. His name, Shaka, is said to derive from Ishaka, an intestinal beetle, a cruel reference to his mother's claim that her pregnancy was merely a stomach ailment. His childhood was one of hardship and humiliation. As a boy without a legitimate place in his father's household, he and Nandi were ostracized and eventually driven into exile. They wandered from clan to clan, facing scorn, enduring poverty. This harsh upbringing did not break Shaka. Instead, it forged in him a relentless ambition and a deep-seated desire to prove his worth and avenge the slights of his youth. Their exile eventually led them to the court of the powerful Mthethwa chief Dingiswayo. Here, the young Shaka finally found a place where his talents could be recognized. He was tall, strong, and possessed an intimidating physical presence. He quickly distinguished himself as a warrior of exceptional bravery and innovative thinking within the Mthethwa Amabuto. Dingiswayo saw the potential in the fierce young man and became his mentor, that would later become the foundation of his own kingdom. Shaka's genius was most evident in his complete overhaul of military strategy and tactics. He took the age-grade regiments, the Amabuto, that Dingiswayo had started and perfected them into a disciplined, professional fighting force. These were not citizen soldiers who fought seasonally. They were warriors for life, housed in great military barracks or amakanda, and forbidden to marry until the king gave them permission, often after years of service. This created a permanent, loyal and highly motivated standing army, the likes of which the region had never seen. The centerpiece of his tactical innovation was the famous Impondo Zankomo, or Horns of the Bull formation. Shaka did away with the chaotic individualistic skirmishes of the past. His army, the Impi, advanced on the enemy in a tightly controlled, disciplined formation. The main fighting force, the chest, the Isifuba, was a strong central body of veteran warriors that would engage the enemy head-on. Simultaneously, two horns, the Izimpondo, composed of younger, faster warriors, would encircle the enemy from the flanks, enveloping and trapping them. Shaka's warriors were armed with the short stabbing spear, the Iklwa, and a large, heavy shield made of cowhide, the Isilangu. The shield was used not just for defense, but as an offensive weapon. The Zulu Impi was more than an army. With his revolutionary army, Shaka began a campaign of systematic conquest. He first turned his attention to his immediate neighbors, absorbing smaller clans into his rapidly growing Zulu nation. His policy was brutal but effective. Defeated clans were given a stark choice: be incorporated into the Zulu Kingdom or be utterly destroyed. Those who submitted saw their men conscripted into the Zulu Amabuto and their women and children absorbed into the Zulu populace. Old clan identities were suppressed and they were forged into a new single identity, Zulu. The ultimate test came against his old rival, Zwide of the Ndwandwe. After Shaka's mentor, Dingiswayo, was killed by Zwide, the Mthethwa Confederacy crumbled, leaving the Zulu and the Ndwandwe as the two undisputed superpowers of the region. The first major confrontation, the Battle of Gwokli Hill, 1818. Though outnumbered, Shaka used the terrain to his advantage. He used reserves and the superior discipline of his troops to repel wave after wave. The final showdown, the Battle of the Mulatuze River C.1819. Just before dawn, Shaka sprang his trap. The Zulu army, fresh and well-positioned, fell upon the weary and disorganized Ndwandwe camp. The battle was a massacre. With the defeat of the Ndwandwe, Shaka was the undisputed master of the region. The meteoric rise of the Zulu Kingdom under Shaka had a catastrophic domino effect that rippled across southern and central Africa. This period is known as the Mfecane Nguni, or the Difekan Sotho Tswana, meaning the crushing or the scattering. It was a time of immense suffering and social upheaval, directly triggered by the Zulu military machine. Clans and peoples fleeing from the path of Shaka's advancing impis crashed into other groups, creating a tidal wave of violence and displacement that depopulated vast swathes of the interior highlands. Entire nations were uprooted, becoming militarized refugees. One famous example, the Ngwane people, under Chief Matiwani. Driven from their lands by the Zulu, they fled west over the Drakensberg Mountains, carving a path of destruction as they went. They attacked and displaced Sotho-speaking peoples who then fled and attacked others. However, the Mfecane was not only destruction, it was also a catalyst for the creation of new states and nations. Soshangani fled north into modern-day Mozambique and founded the Gaza Empire. Zwangandaba led his Ngoni people on a 30-year, 1,000-mile migration to modern-day Tanzania. Mzilikazi, once Shaka's general, defied the king and established the Ndebele Kingdom in what is now Zimbabwe. Life within the Zulu Kingdom was one of order, discipline, and absolute loyalty to the king. Shaka was the great elephant, the source of all law, property, and life itself. He reorganized society along military lines, breaking down old clan loyalties and reforging them into a singular Zulu identity. The Amabuto system was the cornerstone of this new society. Young men were conscripted around the age of 18 and sent to live in the great military barracks, the Amakanda placed throughout the kingdom. Here they spent their youth training, fighting, serving the king as warriors, as laborers, and as royal guards. The Amakanda were more than barracks. They were centers of national life and indoctrination, including male regiments and associated female regiments. Shaka decided who and when they could marry. The economy of the Zulu Kingdom remained centered on cattle. He distributed these herds among the Amakanda. The king's herds were vast. Culture and ritual were also harnessed to glorify the state. As Shaka's power grew, so too did his paranoia and his capacity for cruelty. The king, who had forged a nation through iron will, began to rule it through terror. He demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience, and the slightest infraction could result in a brutal and public execution. His royal kraal, Kwabulawayo, was a place of both immense power and pervasive fear. Shaka was surrounded by a coterie of executioners who would carry out his sentences on the spot for perceived offences, sneezing in his presence, an unapproved glance. This rule of terror ensured compliance, but it also bred deep resentment among those closest to him. The king's despotism became more pronounced over time. He maintained his grip on the army by preventing his warriors from marrying for years on end. He would periodically test the loyalty of his regiments with arbitrary and deadly commands. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827 plunged the kingdom into a period of horrific, state-enforced mourning. Overcome with grief and rage, Shaka descended into a state of madness. He decreed that no crops should be planted for a year, no milk could be drunk, the very basis of the Zulu diet, and it is said that thousands of Zulus who were deemed insufficiently grief-stricken were killed in the ensuing hysteria. By September of 1828, the conspiracy had solidified. The main plotters were his two half-brothers, Dingane, Muslangana, and a trusted royal servant, Mbopa. They had grown weary of Shaka's tyranny and were fearful for their own lives. With the bulk of the Zulu army sent away to the north, the conspirators saw their chance. The king was vulnerable, left with only a few bodyguards at his royal kraal of Kwadakuza. On September 24, 1828, the plotters made their move. According to the most common accounts, they approached Shaka in the cattle enclosure while he was receiving a delegation of visitors. Under the pretense of reporting some matter to the king, they closed in. Mbopa is said to have been the first to strike, with Dingane and Muslangana quickly joining in, stabbing the unprepared king repeatedly with their spears. Shaka, the master of the stabbing spear, met his end by the very weapon he had perfected. His final words are reputed to have been a chilling prophecy to his brothers. "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth? You will not rule, for the swallows will do so." Dingane, the shrewdest of the conspirators, quickly moved to consolidate his power. Dingane ascended to the throne, but he inherited a kingdom built in Shaka's image and a throne stained by his brother's blood. The era of the great elephant was over.
The story of the Zulu Kingdom often starts with a bang. You hear about Shaka Zulu, a military genius who forged a mighty empire from scattered clans. His name echoes through history like a war drum. But after the fire and fury, there was King Mpande, another of Shaka's half-brothers. He was seen as the calm one, the peaceful one. He took the throne in 1840, and for a while it seemed like the storms had finally passed over Zululand. Mpande was a different kind of king. He wasn't a warrior like Shaka or a schemer like Dingane. He was a diplomat, a survivor. He understood the world was changing around him. On one side, he had the Boers. On the other, the British were expanding their colony from the coast. Mpande knew he couldn't fight everyone at once, so he played a careful game. He made deals, he signed treaties, he kept the peace for nearly 30 years. But while Mpande ruled, his family grew. He had many wives and many sons. Two of his sons, Cetshwayo and Mimbuyazi, grew up to be powerful young men. They built their own followings, gathered their own warriors, and eyed each other with suspicion. The breaking point came in 1856 at the Battle of Ndonda Kusuka. It was brother against brother, Zulu against Zulu. Cetshwayo's forces were victorious, and Mimbuyazi was killed. From that day on, even though Mpande was still officially the king, everyone knew who held the real power. The long, peaceful reign of King Mpande was drawing to a close, and the drums of war were beginning to beat once more. Cetshwayo was the heir, the warrior, the future. The quiet years were over. The choices he would make would determine not just his own fate but the fate of the entire Zulu nation. With his brother Mbuyazi defeated, Cetshwayo Kampande became the most powerful man in the Zulu Kingdom, even while his father, Mpande, was still alive. Imagine that dynamic. Your dad is the CEO, but you're the one everyone listens to in the boardroom. Cetshwayo was a throwback to the old days. He admired his uncle Shaka. He believed in a strong, disciplined army. He believed in a proud, independent Zulu nation. He began to rebuild the military system that Shaka had perfected. Young men were once again organized into regiments. For years, Cetshwayo basically ran the kingdom from behind the scenes. He managed the army, he dealt with neighboring chiefs, he held the respect of the warriors. His father, Mpande, was the face of the kingdom. Cetshwayo was its future. He saw the encroaching Europeans, the Boers, the British. He viewed them as a fundamental threat to the Zulu way of life. He knew that his father's strategy of peace and diplomacy could only last so long. A confrontation was coming. When King Mpande finally passed away in 1872, the transition was smooth. Cetshwayo was the undisputed king. His coronation was a massive event, a celebration of Zulu strength. But he inherited a kingdom standing at a crossroads. The pressures from outside were mounting. As king, Cetshwayo tried to walk a fine line. He wanted to modernize his army. He resisted the efforts of missionaries to convert his people, seeing it as a cultural invasion. He was preparing his people for a struggle he felt was inevitable. He wasn't looking for a fight, not yet. But he was making it very clear to the world. If a fight came to Zululand, the Zulu would not back down. His reign was a statement. We are here. We are strong. This is our land. The world outside the Zulu Kingdom was shrinking. To the west and north were the Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers. They were fiercely independent. They were deeply religious. They were always looking for new land for their farms. They had been in a long-running dispute with the Zulus over a strip of territory along the Blood River. Both sides claimed it. To the Boers it was land they had earned. To the Zulus it was ancestral ground that had been part of their kingdom for generations. This land dispute was like a slow-burning fire, creating constant tension, with raids and counter-raids. Then there were the British. They controlled the colony of Natal, right on the Zulu Kingdom's southern border. For a while the British saw the powerful Zulu Kingdom as a useful buffer. A man named Sir Theophilus Shepstone had long been an expert on Zulu affairs. He spoke the language, he knew the customs. The game changed completely in 1877. The British annexed the Boer Republic of the Transvaal. Suddenly the British weren't just neighbors on one side, they now controlled territory on two sides of the Zulu Kingdom. and in annexing the Transvaal, they also inherited the Boers' land dispute with Cetshwayo. The man sent to make this new confederation a reality was Sir Henry Bartle Frere. He arrived in South Africa with a mission. He saw Cetshwayo's army not as a defensive force but as a threat. In his mind, you couldn't have a modern, civilized confederation with a savage army of 40,000 warriors right next door. He started looking for a reason, any reason, to justify a war. The long period of cautious diplomacy was over, a collision course was set. The British Empire at the height of its power was turning its gaze towards Zululand. Sir Bartle Frere had made up his mind. The Zulu Kingdom had to be broken. A few minor border incidents, which in the past would have been resolved with a fine of a few cattle, were blown up into major international crises. He portrayed Cetshwayo as a bloodthirsty tyrant who was planning to invade the British colony of Natal. The final act came in December 1878. British representatives met with Zulu chiefs at the Lower Tugela Drift. There, the British delivered an ultimatum. It was a list of demands impossible for any sovereign ruler to accept. Cetshwayo was given just 30 days to comply. The terms were designed to be rejected. First, Cetshwayo had to disband his entire army. This was the core of Zulu power and identity. Second, he had to accept a British resident. He also had to change the Zulu marriage system. He had to allow missionaries to operate freely. In short, give up his sovereignty, give up his army, give up his culture, give up his independence. Cetshwayo had no choice. To accept the ultimatum would be the end of the Zulu Kingdom in all but name. To reject it meant war with the most powerful empire on earth. He tried to negotiate, offered to pay fines for the border incidents, but he could not and would not disband his army. That was a line he would not cross. As the 30-day deadline ticked away, the Zulu warriors began to gather. The ultimatum was the trigger, and the war was about to begin. In early January 1879, with the ultimatum expired, the British Army invaded Zululand. Lord Chelmsford was feeling super confident. He had a modern army with rifles, cannons, and a professional command structure. He was up against an army armed mostly with spears and shields. How could he possibly lose, right? On January 20th, they set up a large, sprawling camp at the foot of this strange, sphinx-shaped mountain called Isandlwana. And honestly, they didn't even bother to fortify it properly. On the morning of January 22nd, Lord Chelmsford made a fatal mistake. He took about half of his troops and went off in pursuit of what he thought was the main Zulu army. He left behind a camp of around 1,800 soldiers. Everyone was pretty relaxed. Some folks were making breakfast, others were writing letters home. They had no clue that the main Zulu army, over 20,000 warriors strong, was hidden in a valley just a few miles away, waiting silently for the perfect moment to strike. Around midday, the trap was sprung. The Zulu army came out of hiding, but it wasn't just a wild mob. They advanced in the classic horns of the buffalo formation perfected by Shaka. The British soldiers, totally shocked by the sheer number of warriors, quickly formed a firing line. Their Martini Henry rifles were powerful and accurate, and for a while, they actually held the Zulus back, inflicting terrible casualties. But the Zulu army just kept coming, wave after wave. The British firing line started to falter. Ammunition ran low. The Zulus in the horns of the formation closed in, cutting off any chance of escape. The whole thing descended into chaos, a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. The red-coated soldiers were swallowed up by the mass of Zulu warriors. It was spears and shields against bayonets and rifle butts. Within just a couple of hours, it was all over. The British camp was completely overrun. The defeat was, honestly, absolute. The Zulu victory at Isandlwana was one of the most shocking defeats in the history of the British Empire. It sent a wave of disbelief and panic through British South Africa and all the way back to London. The war was far from over, but the Zulus had shown the world their incredible courage and military prowess. Just a few miles away from the carnage at Isandlwana, a different kind of drama was unfolding. Rorke's Drift was a small mission station used as a supply depot and hospital. It was manned by a tiny garrison, just over 150 soldiers. Late in the afternoon on January 22nd, a few terrified survivors from Isandlwana staggered into the post. They brought the unbelievable news of the main army's destruction and a warning. A large Zulu force was heading their way. The officers had a choice, try to flee or stay and fight. Fleeing with wagons full of sick and wounded men seemed impossible. So they made the heroic decision to fortify their small post and make a stand. They had very little time. The Zulu force that arrived at Rorke's Drift was a reserve contingent of about 4,000 warriors, led by Prince Dabulamanzi, Cetshwayo's half-brother. They launched a series of ferocious assaults on the makeshift barricades. For over 10 hours, through the late afternoon and into the dead of night, the battle raged. The hospital building was set on fire, and the British defenders had to fight their way out, room by room, saving the patients while holding back the attackers. The fighting was relentless, and at point-blank range. The British soldiers, protected by their barricades, fired volley after volley into the charging Zulu ranks. The sheer firepower of the Martini Henry rifle in such close quarters was devastating. Despite their courage, the Zulus could not break through the determined defense. As dawn approached, the attacks finally subsided. The tiny garrison had held. The defense of Rorke's Drift was an incredible feat of courage and discipline. The British Empire, reeling from the humiliation of Isandlwana, desperately needed a hero story. And Rorke's Drift provided it. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the defenders. The victory at Isandlwana was a stunning achievement for the Zulu army, but it came at a high price. Thousands of warriors had been killed or wounded. More importantly, it made the British even more determined to win the war. Huge reinforcements were sent from all over the British Empire. Cetshwayo knew his position was difficult. He had won a battle, but he couldn't win the war. He tried to open peace negotiations, but the British were not interested in talking anymore. Their goal was now the total subjugation of the Zulu nation and the capture of its king. The final decisive battle took place on July 4, 1879. Lord Chelmsford marched his new army of over 5,000 men to the plains near Ulundi. This time he took no chances. When the Zulu army appeared, the British formed a massive, hollow square. It was a giant, walking fortress of firepower. The Zulu army, with immense bravery, charged the square from all sides just as they had done at Isandlwana. But this time there was no surprise, no unprotected flank. The result was a slaughter. The Zulus charged into a storm of bullets and cannon fire. Their spears and shields were no match for the disciplined, concentrated firepower. The warriors were cut down in their hundreds. The battle was over in less than an hour. The Zulu army was broken and scattered. After the battle, the British marched into the royal kraal of Ulundi and burned it to the ground. The military power of the Zulu Kingdom, which had dominated the region for half a century, was shattered in a single morning. The war was effectively over. The independent Zulu Kingdom, forged by Shaka and defended so bravely, had ceased to exist as a military power. The age of Zulu dominance in southern Africa had come to an end. With his army defeated and his capital in ashes, King Cetshwayo became a fugitive. Eventually he was found and taken prisoner. The British broke the unified kingdom into 13 separate, smaller chiefdoms, each ruled by a chief appointed by the British. This forced division led to a period of terrible chaos and civil war. Zulu fought against Zulu once more. The end of the kingdom wasn't the end for the Zulu people. Their fighting spirit didn't die at Ulundi. Through the 1900s, during segregation and apartheid, the Zulu remained a cultural and political force. The royal family remained an important symbol of unity and tradition. Zulu is one of South Africa's most spoken languages today. Lively music, energetic dancing, detailed beadwork, stories retold, Shaka, Cetshwayo, Isandlwana, Rorke's Drift. Today the Zulu nation is central to modern democratic South Africa. Different world, same strong Zulu identity. The Zulu king remains a respected cultural protector and voice. Old ceremonies and gatherings still bind communities. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, tech business owners. The second half of the kingdom's story is one of strength. They faced the British Empire and fought bravely. They suffered loss, had the kingdom torn apart, and endured colonial rule. 150 years later, Zulu identity is as strong as ever. History lives beyond books and museums. It lives in the language, the songs, the ceremonies, and in the hearts of millions of Zulu people. The kingdom is gone, but the nation lives on. The warrior spirit that defended Isandlwana, the pride that built a great kingdom, the culture that survived colonialism. All of this continues to thrive in the modern world. The Zulu story is far from over.